At 6-3, the Chargers are firmly entrenched in the playoff race, and at this point in the season, I think 4 more wins will get them into the tournament in year 1 of Jim Harbaugh.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 9 seasons, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen, and to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Playoffs? We're talking playoffs? Yes, sir. The Chargers are 6-3, and they have put themselves in a very good position if they are able to handle their business to get into the playoffs in year 1. But what exactly is it going to take? We're going to talk about that. And if Jesse Minter does get that opportunity to be a head coach in the next cycle, who on the staff would be the best replacement? Fortunately, the Chargers have a couple of options to choose from on their own staff. And is this O-line actually getting better?
I mean, you could probably argue that the last game was their best game, but you can start this season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. David, it is our Chargers mailbag day, and today we have a bunch of great questions, so thank you to all the everydayers who hit us up at LockedOnLAC on Twitter, or you called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. We have some great voicemails today, too. But there was a common thread in the questions post that we put out, David, and a lot of people wondering about the playoffs. And it's a conversation we've kind of held off on having until now. We have a representative sample size. This team has twice as many wins as it does losses, and they have the hardest stretch of their season coming up. And I think what was on most Chargers fans' minds is how many more games do they have to get to, which is where Joseph Rodriguez comes in and says, what do you guys believe is the magic number of wins the Chargers need for the rest of the season to secure a playoff spot? David, what is your magic number right now?
Yeah, I think right now, looking at it and looking at kind of the teams that are in the race, that are still kind of on that bubble, you're looking at the Broncos, the Colts, and the Bengals really, kind of fighting things out there. And then the Jets are really kind of on the outside looking in, with 3 wins. But the AFC conference has been pretty light. And so far, yeah, the Chargers have had a light schedule, but they've done a good enough job to handle their business. So for me, looking at this and looking at who they have on their schedule for the rest of the season, I think if they get to 10 wins, that they could feel really good about making the playoffs. But for me, if you just want to stamp it and not really have any bad feelings about it, I think it's 11. So for me, get to 11 wins, and then I think you can feel 100% that the Chargers will be in the playoffs in year 1 with Coach Harbaugh.
Yeah, like mathematically, 11 doesn't necessarily get you in, which is crazy because of how many bad AFC teams there have been this year. But this is probably the most sure as a 6-3 team you could be about a playoff spot, and considering how bad the rest of the AFC has been. Like you said, it is basically a 4-team race for 2 playoff spots. Right now, the Chargers currently hold the 2nd wild card spot, which is 6th in the AFC. 3 teams behind them, the Bengals, Broncos, and Colts. The Bengals and the Colts both have 6 losses already. The Broncos have 5 losses already. So that's why, okay, if you got to 11 wins, you could go 11-6. Technically, the Broncos could still go 11-6. Technically, the Bengals and the Colts could all go 11-6, but they can't all do it. And that's the big thing, because the Broncos still have the Colts and the Bengals on their schedule, so they're going to beat each other up. The Bengals also have the Broncos on their schedule, so these teams are going to knock each other around and knock this number down a little bit. Right now, if you got to 12 wins, that's the only thing that would 100% get you in. No tiebreakers necessary. The Colts and the Bengals cannot get to 12 wins. So that would mean even if the Broncos go crazy, they cannot take that last spot away from you. It would be the Broncos and the Chargers that ended up getting those final 2 spots. They are positioned well. This is the other thing too. It's like with the Bengals, they've only beaten bad teams, right? They'll play the Chargers this weekend, but so far, even though they've played the Kansas City Chiefs to a 1-point game, they played the Ravens to a 1-point game, The only teams that they've beat so far are the Raiders, the Panthers, the Giants, and the Browns. So if the Chargers get to 10 wins, right, it's just hard for me to believe that 2 out of the 3 of the Broncos, the Colts, and the Bengals are all going to get to 10 wins, because that's what it would have to be, and then they would have to hope for tiebreakers. But it does mean it has super importance on this game coming up, because right now, per NFL.com, there's a lot of different metrics out there to gauge playoff chances. The Chargers have a 79% chance to make the playoffs, but that goes up to a 91% chance if they win this week. Because guess what? The first tiebreaker in playoff situations is head-to-head. If the Chargers beat the Bengals, they have 7 losses, which means the best they could get to would be 10-7 for the season.
Right.
That means if the Chargers got to 10-7 and the Bengals got to 10-7, the Chargers would move on.
Are in. Yeah.
Which basically tells you right now, hey, you win this one, it greatly improves your chances. If you beat the Broncos and the Bengals, you're almost guaranteed to be in with 10 wins.
Yeah, 100%. Like that's what it is right there. Like that is the whole kind of situation, is wanting to have the most control over your own destiny. And in this situation, the way the playoffs are set up right now, Daniel, it's just exactly how you said it. You beat the Bengals, you beat the Broncos, and then at that point, you're pretty much in the driver's seat with an open highway on your way to the promised land of the playoffs.
And that's what we wanted, right? Going into the season, we said we expected playoffs. You have Jim Harbaugh, you have Justin Herbert, you should make the playoffs. What we didn't know is they're going to have the number 1 defense. But we did know it was going to be a struggle potentially offensively with the amount of weapons that they shipped in and also shipped out.
Yeah.
If you get to 10 wins in the 2024 season, that probably gets you into the playoffs, which means you have 3 games at the end of the season against the Raiders, the Broncos, and the Patriots that you feel pretty good about, which means you only have to win one of your next 5 games if you're planning on doing it. But going 4-4 over the last 8 is really all it takes for the Chargers to get in the playoffs, how it looks right now. But this is a different question we have here from John Clark, who asks, what would you guys need to see out of the Chargers over the next 5 games to convince you that they would be capable of a deep playoff run to at least the AFC Championship game this postseason? So again, let's say it. Bengals at home, Ravens at home, then you're going to Atlanta, to the Chiefs, and then you have the last one at home against the Buccaneers. It's about as tough as it gets, David. What would they have to do against those teams specifically to not only show you, hey, we're a playoff team, but we can actually make a run?
Yeah, for me, I think it's, the first thing that comes to mind is coming out of this 5-game stretch with at least 3 wins. I think that would give me a lot of confidence.
Over 500, yeah.
Yeah, over 500 for sure is a requirement for me, because there's always been the big stigma, even last year, can the Chargers beat the better teams in the league? And right now, up to this point, Justin Herbert injury withstanding or not, they have not been able to beat a quality team up to this point. So you're going to have to prove it to me. And yes, I'm an eternal optimist, but even then, I need to see the proof is in the pudding. And then prove you're really an elite defense by being an elite defense against the elite offenses. Like, that's what it has to be for me. And then continue limiting the explosive plays against the better quarterbacks. You do these things, and then you're going to give me a very good feeling about how legitimate this team is going forward.
Yeah, I mean, the AFC Championship game is a huge goal, because we're talking about a team that's fighting for a wild card spot, because they're in the only division that has an undefeated team in it, right? So the division's kind of out of the question as we see it right now. To me, it's pretty simple. Beat the Chiefs and beat the Ravens, and pretty much no matter what happens in those other 3 games, I'm going to believe that you could make a run to the AFC Championship game, because those are the teams you're going to have to beat one of those 2 teams to get there, right?
Yeah.
But basically, unless one of them gets bounced, I mean, but the Chiefs are likely going to have a bye. The Baltimore Ravens are probably going to, have a matchup they can easily win, or at least can have a great chance of winning. You're probably going to have to play one of those teams to get to the AFC Championship game, because if not, those teams are there, right? The Bills you don't play, that would be another measuring stick game. If you beat those 2 teams, I'll believe they can make a championship run. I would be very impressed at 3-2, but if you don't beat the 2 teams that are most likely to get to the AFC Championship game right now, it's hard for me to fully buy into that. I would say, hey, if you go 3-2, I believe you can win a playoff game, and I don't think that's out of the question at all. If you go 4-1, right, and maybe you beat one of those 2 teams, then I could buy in a little bit on a deeper playoff run. But yeah, I think the easiest way for us to show us that, beat the other 2 teams that were in the AFC Championship game last season. Beat the Chiefs, beat the Ravens, and I'll be a full-on believer in Jim Harbaugh and this team doing something really, really special in year one. But we still have more to get into, including a Heir calling in, and he thinks he has a name that could be the replacement for Jesse Minter if he decides to move on in 2025. So we're getting into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, David, though, I have to tell you guys about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can get $5 and bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats for you live play-by-play and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. We talked about the line. Right now, it's still 1.5. I wouldn't be surprised if this game got close to a coin flip, maybe even a half-point spread, because that's just what it seems like it's going to be. Like we just talked about, the Bengals are desperate. They almost have to win this game to have a shot at the playoffs, especially with a couple of tough games they have coming up. And for the Chargers, this is a huge statement game for them to say, hey, even if it's a 4-6 team, we can beat a good team. We can beat a team with an elite quarterback. And if you guys want to get action on not just the point spread, but also what the over-under is going to be for this game, anytime touchdown scores and more, just visit FanDuel.com today. And you get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I also need to tell you guys about PrizePicks, America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. PrizePicks is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports because unlike other apps, on PrizePicks, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. You can now win 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. PrizePicks is also the best way to get action on sports in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. For this weekend's game against the Bengals, there's some good ones. You can go with Justin Herbert throwing for more or less than 229.5 passing yards and pair that with Ladd McConkey getting more or less than 53.5 receiving yards. They also have Quentin Johnson. You could do that too, going for more or less than 38.5 receiving yards. Or you could just go with all three. You go with all three and you hit them, you win. Download the PrizePicks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code LOCKEDONNFL on PrizePicks to get that $50 instantly when you play just $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. Dave, let's continue getting into this Chargers mailbag, and we have to get to a voicemail here from one of our favorites who has, I think, a pretty good nomination for someone that could potentially take over the job for Jesse Minter, something we're very terrified of happening. And Jim Harbaugh really, made more real a couple of days ago, him leaving in 2025. But there are some good replacements, and Heir has one that he's going to talk about right now.
David, my baby, this is SCU. I love you. Okay, I got a question. We just heard about possibly Jesse Minter leaving. Do you believe NaVorro Bowman is the top candidate to replace him for Coach Harbaugh? Or do you believe they are going to go outside the building? They will have time, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on this. Take you. Love you, my baby.
David, it's a good question. I know me and you are very smitten with the job that NaVorro Bowman's been able to do, and we love the hiring of him, and I think he's exceeded all expectations for, what we expected for a guy who didn't have this experience beforehand. So do you think this is something that could happen in 2025?
Yeah, I love NaVorro Bowman. I absolutely love what he's done with the linebacker room. He's really made Deion Henley look like a superstar. And honestly, anybody who's had to go out there has looked the part, and they've played the part. They've been in the right place. They've played exceptionally well, whether it's Nick Neiman, whether it's Troy Dye out there. They're out there making plays. They're not just warm bodies. They're out there executing the defense, and I think that's a huge credit to NaVorro Bowman. With that being said, this is NaVorro Bowman's first year as a linebackers coach in the NFL, and he was a coach at his alma mater last year, but that's it. We're talking about 2 years of coaching experience. And again, I love NaVorro Bowman, 4-time All-Pro, like an absolutely phenomenal linebacker. But there's another name on the defensive coaching staff that I feel like is a little bit more qualified to step in and be a defensive coordinator, and to me, that is secondaries coach Steve Clinkscale. Steve Clinkscale has 23 years of coaching experience, and he has been a defensive coordinator, co-defensive coordinator last year at Michigan, and also at Cincinnati at a previous stop coaching the secondary. And hey, the secondary has been phenomenal under Steve Clinkscale. I think, being able to get the guys out there like the Christian Fultons to play well, but the most impressive part is being able to cycle in Tarheeb Still, be able to put in Cam Hart, and not miss a beat and still look extremely successful. So to me, that is my pick for the next DC. Heaven forbid if Jesse Minter decides to leave us.
Yeah, and shout out Stephen Haglund. He was the first person I saw make that connection. And I think it's a great point because, I mean, who better to run a defense that the Michigan defense was running last year than the co-defensive coordinator? I do think it's also a good point. I mean, he was NaVorro Bowman, that is, a defensive analyst last year for Maryland, basically just a defensive assistant. Now he's getting a huge bump up. Right? I do think he could be a defensive coordinator in this league someday, and I'd say the trajectory for him is way up. Okay. But yeah, I think Steve Clinkscale, if they wanted to go in-house, could definitely be one of the best options that they have. Someone who's been multiple seasons with Jesse Minter now. Could they try to go get someone from the Mike McDonald tree and someone that runs a very similar defense? Yeah, they could. But I do think it also kind of shows you just something we didn't talk about as much when having the Jesse Minter conversation is just the eye that Jim Harbaugh has for a coaching staff. And he told us he was going to put an all-star staff together, and it feels like they've delivered on that. And that leads us to hear with Stephen Gillard, who asks, we are all singing the praises of Jesse Minter, but what positional coaches deserve shout-outs for their work with the roster? David, that's a good question. I think Steve Clinkscale obviously would be the guy you would talk about here because of the work that he's done with Cam Hart, with Tarheeb Still, getting Christian Fulton to kind of bounce back the way that he has. Jasir Taylor playing as well as we've ever seen him, in his first 3 seasons as well. Who else would you give shout-outs to if you're going through the other positional coaches? Because I do think there are several guys who deserve mentioning.
There absolutely is, and one of them, the first one that comes to my mind, is the defensive line coach, Mike Elston, because that, to me and to you, was our biggest concern going into this season is that looked like an obvious deficiency. How is that unit going to perform? And they have way overperformed any expectation that we had for them. Their ability to stop the run, to be able to pass rush. Like, we knew the pass rush was there, like the quality was there. But, I mean, guys, T.R. Tart, fantastic. Poona Ford has been, like, absolutely incredible for this defensive line. Like, a guy that, was made inactive for multiple games last year for the Buffalo Bills has come in and been one of the best defensive linemen on this team and has made a massive difference. NaVorro Bowman at linebacker, already talked about that, but also like to shout out the safeties coach, Chris O'Leary, as well. I think he's done a fantastic job with those safeties and finding that right combination, and that whole secondary unit as a whole has really performed very, very well.
Yeah, Derwin James playing, right, much better than we've seen the last couple of years. Elijah Molden going to a level he's never been at before. The other guys I would shout out, right, Sanjay Lal. That was the other one. If you're going into the season talking about what the biggest weaknesses / question marks were, it was the defensive line, but it was also the wide receiver room, who got ranked by several different major media outlets as the worst group in the league. And over the past month, you wouldn't know it. I think a big part of that has to do with Sanjay Lal, and I know that for a fact, Sanjay Lal's special assignment was Quentin Johnston, and Quentin Johnston has looked like a completely different player in year 2. Facts. Sanjay Lal did great with DK Metcalf. He's done great with this wide receiver group as well. And then you have to also shout out Shane Day, because we know Justin Herbert loves him. We know his best seasons have come with Shane Day, and it's no, questioning why this is another one of his best seasons. But let's get this last one here from Boomer, who says, if the cornerbacks do great in this game, especially if T. Higgins plays, is that the final nail in the coffin for Asante Samuel Jr., David? I think that's a good question.
It is a very good question, and I think this is, without a doubt, the biggest test. If T. Higgins is able to be out there, even not, I mean, you're talking about Jamar Chase.
You're going to get matched up with Jamar Chase at some point.
And then it's going to be real. Right? And then we're talking about a guy who had 260-plus receiving yards in his last game. Jamar Chase is the most dangerous wide receiver that the Chargers are going to play this season, in my opinion. And so if you pass that test, then even whenever Asante Samuel does come back, it might just be in a support role after being able to handle or really, be able to,
you're saying is
take care of Jamar Chase.
He could get DJ Charked, is what you're saying.
Exactly
right?
what I'm saying. 100%.
Yeah, no, I get it. I'll say this. That coffin might already be 6 feet under.
You're right.
I mean, that coffin might be buried already before. That being said, you go into a game against Jamar Chase and T. Higgins potentially, maybe somebody comes out of the coffin, right? Maybe it's a zombie situation.
That is true.
You could come out of it feeling a lot worse than you did going into it. And obviously this is the best receiver that they've played so far this season who can do that in any given game. And I think the scary thing about what he did last week is there was no T. Higgins. So the Ravens absolutely knew the one guy they needed to stop on that offense, and they couldn't do it, right?
At all.
So we'll see. I mean, it's going to be, I'm so excited / nervous to see it because these guys have played so well up to this point. More credit to Steve Clinkscale. But I think at a certain point, especially even if it's close, right? Even if Cam Hart is playing at an equal level of Sanjay Lal Jr. or Tarheeb Still, at a certain point, are you going to stick with the guys as long as they're helping you and not hindering you?
Right.
With the guys that are going to be here for the next 3 years after 2024, or the guy who's probably not going to get re-signed in the offseason?
Needed playing time.
It's needed playing time as long as they're helping you, right?
Yeah.
If Sanjay Lal Jr. as a team that we think is going to make the playoffs helps you more, than put him in. If it's close, though, why not go with the young guys who can get such invaluable experience and guys that are probably going to be starting for you in 2025 and going forward? But we still have more Chargers mailbag to get into with some great stuff, including the assessment of this offensive line, who's coming off their best game, and how much the interior of the offensive line could cost them if they can't keep their things together during this next 5-game stretch. We're getting all that and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to say, hey, Chargers fans, remember our great partner, Ultimate Pro Football GM? Well, they're back now, and they've added an amazing new game mode that I need to tell you about, because the game has you step into the shoes of a football franchise GM and lead it to glory, but they now have a head coach career mode. So on top of getting to build your dynasty and drafting players, signing free agents, and hiring a coaching staff, now you also get to call the offensive plays during the game as well, which is awesome. A huge upgrade. Additionally, you'll dig new tools that you can work with, such as individual training camps, upgraded negotiation system. So this fun and realistic game just got a lot better. If you've already have it installed, be sure to update it so you can now try this new mode. One of my favorite things about Ultimate Pro Football GM is that it's completely free. It has no ads, and it's 100% playable offline. Play on the go as you want, when you want. And here's a special offer for Locked On fans. Use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL, all caps, inside the game store to receive a boost to your franchise. This is huge. It'll save you years of trying to dig your way out of where you start. Make sure to get it. This perk will jumpstart your play and give you the advantage that you want in creating a dynasty. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up on the app stores. Ultimate Pro Football GM. Start your dynasty today. All right, David, well, we still have more Chargers mailbag questions to get into, but I do want to shout out the everydayers who hit us up at LockedOnLAC on Twitter and got their questions on today's show, or those who called in like Athir at 323-524-7924, left us a 30-second question to get on the show. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the new slate at Locked On NFL with 2 shows a day. Tyler, the man rolling in the morning, and later on with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop, bringing on the daily experts who cover their team every single day, wherever you get your podcast from and on YouTube. David, we do have another voicemail here about the offensive line who is coming off of their best game. Maybe something that they can continue.
Hey guys, this is Rob from Milwaukee. I just want to talk about the offensive line real quick. So despite going against the top 5 best defensive front in the Tennessee Titans this week, the offensive line played stellar. Even with Trey Pipkins out, rotating in Soler and Foster Sorrell, and Zion Johnson ranking top 5 in offensive performance rating for this week. What is your guys' assessment of the offensive line up to date, and where do you think it can go for the rest of the season? Thanks. Go Bolts.
David, I think it's a great question, and it was something we almost got into yesterday on our buy and sell show, just like, hey, should Jamari Sawyer potentially, are we buying or selling him, being that starter for the rest of the season? So what do you think your assessment has been? What do you think you can expect from this group going forward? Would you make a change there? Would you potentially keep Jamari Sawyer in? How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think looking at this offensive line, it's been the offensive tackles have been the patriarchs of this offensive line. They've been fantastic, equally as pass protectors and run blockers. They both, when you look at their PFF grades, are in the 70th percentile or higher in both of those metrics on the outside. So Joe Alt, Rashawn Slater, been playing fantastic football. You look at the interior there, the pass protection rates are not great, but I think you do have to give some credit to Zion Johnson as far as him as a run blocker, because he has been a very, very strong run blocker up to this point this season. The big question here is, are they going to be able to build off of this performance, with Jeffrey Simmons and Devondre Sweat and, some legit, weapons on the inside and the interior of the defensive line? Are they going to be able to handle that when they come up against some really, really good defensive linemen? And we know that the biggest question is the stunts and the twists. Is that communication still going to be there? Are they going to be able to pass off those blocks? Is that going to be able to get fixed going forward? And as far as Jamari Sawyer, I thought he performed exceptionally well there. I thought he looked good. I felt like he really didn't give up much pressure, and he was solid as a run blocker as well. So I don't think you can't at least entertain, putting him out there and seeing that if that's going to give you some better chemistry moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the important thing to remember is it wasn't Jamari Sawyer's first game playing this year, right? And we've already seen multiple games with him struggling. And although it's great to see, 0 pressures allowed on 17 pass blocking snaps, it's also important to remember that Trey Pipkins allowed just 2 pressures and 76 pass blocking snaps in weeks 8 and 9, right? That's not something that kills you as an offense. If they think it works, if that's what the coaching staff wants to go with, I think do it. I do think that as far as, we did have a question, I think Brett Choi, somebody else asked about how the offensive line has been handling stunts and things like that. I went back and watched it. In this game, they handled it way better. There were a few times with Jamari Sawyer and Joe Alt where they just handed it off beautifully, and that has been the Achilles heel, the silver bullet that has killed this offensive line, and especially the interior all season long. That looked a lot better. So we'll see when Trey Pipkins come back. I think overall, as far as the assessment, is not good enough from this offensive line. I mean, they ranked 24th in pass block win rate, which is much higher after last week. That was one of their best games, if not their best game of the season, and 17th in run block win rate. They're not average in either category, right, as a whole. That has to change, right? Yeah. Like, imagine if both of those groups were in the top 15, how much differently we'd be thinking about this offense right now. But it's not good enough, and that is the point assessment of it. Can it get better? I think last week gives you at least a little bit of hope that it can. Let's get to this next one here from Dre Armida, who says, is our biggest weakness interior offensive line, and will it be a factor over the gauntlet we're about to enter? David, what do you think? I mean, there's some names that you don't want to see if you have a struggling interior offensive line coming up in these next 5 games.
Is it the biggest weakness? Yes, obviously it's the biggest weakness. That is a clear answer. Is it something that you should be concerned about going up against these teams? Yes, for sure. There's several guys that give you a lot should give you some nightmares when you go to sleep at night. It's Justin Madubuike with the Ravens, who has 5 sacks. It's Chris Jones, obviously you've already seen earlier this year, and you've seen for the last 6 or 7 seasons. You know how dominant that guy is, how disruptive he is. And then there's the wild Samoan Vita Vea, who is extremely disruptive and can stop the run and go chase after your quarterback. He is a lot more athletic than he really looks, which is very scary. But all of these guys can affect the game, and you should be concerned, no doubt.
Yeah, I mean, the Bengals have B.J. Hill, who's decent on the inside. The Falcons really don't have anybody on the interior that scares you that much. But just that sheer size standpoint, Vita Vea is terrifying. Moves much better. I mean, good pass rusher, good run, stopper. He's the whole package. Yeah. And you have 3 of maybe the top 10 defensive tackles in the league, somewhere around that range, coming up in these next 5 games. Yeah, it's scary. And I think the main thing is just not letting any of those guys absolutely take over the game. This week, it'll be more about Trey Hendrickson. And these other games, it's going to be a lot more about the interior. But we do have one more to get into here from Jackson, who has a 5-year plan question I want to get to.
Daniel, David, this is Jackson here. So when Jim Harbaugh got signed, we knew that this was going to be a 5-year plan. And so far, year 1, we are looking absolutely terrific. So the question that I have for you two, minus re-signings of current players, what key additions would you like to see in the next coming years to make this team a Super Bowl contender and Super Bowl champion?
It's a great question, David. And I think if you're just looking at position groups, right, and what positions they need to add to make this team go to the next level, what do you think of?
Yeah, it's 4 for me really quickly. A legit pass-catching tight end. That's a big one. A young, dominant center and a pass-rushing interior defensive lineman and a corner. I think those are the 4 positions to me that I feel like if you're able to add difference makers at all of those position groups, then you set yourself up to have a lot of success going forward.
Yeah, I think there's one that a lot of people would be surprised you didn't say that I would add to that, and that's wide receiver, right? But I think it's kind of like this. for me. I mean, either you add a top end tight end or a wide receiver one. If you can get one of those two things, then if you just add a legitimate above average type of player at that other position, you could make that work easily. If you have one dominant guy at one of those positions, you can add a dominant pass catching tight end, or you can add a true wide receiver one, both those would be on the list. I'd also say a difference maker on the defensive line. Right? When's the last time we've seen a huge difference maker? Jamal Williams, right? That's the first guy and the guy that always comes to mind. That's been a while. The hard thing is the market is terrible for some of these positions, right? Unless you want to pay T. Higgins $30 million, you're not going to like or want to pay wide receiver one money to the rest of the guys, the Amari Coopers and the Chris Godwins of the world that are going to be out there. If you're looking at tight ends, it's even worse. The best tight end available, according to, I think, Pro Football Focus or Pro Football Network, was Mike Gesicki when I was looking this up. And then it's like Tyler Conklin and Juwan Johnson. Rounding out the top three. You're not going to get a dominant pass catching tight end. Interior offensive line, that's a little different. Trey Smith, about to be a free agent. They already have a bunch of highly paid guys on that offensive line. Then you have Zach Martin, a little bit older, but definitely could fill a huge role. Tevin Jenkins from the Chicago Bears, another guy that's headed into free agency. Then I would also say, hey, someone like an Liam McNeil on the defensive line, getting a difference maker. You're not going to want to pay tight ends or wide receivers this money. I know you have a lot of it. You're not going to want to pay those guys. But it looks like in the trenches, you could add some difference makers. And if you want to spend big bucks to improve two of those three interior offensive line spots to get a difference maker at defensive line and fill that around with guys that Joe Ortiz has already proven that he can bring in, now you're a true Super Bowl contender in my mind. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. We have a huge, huge game coming up this week. And tomorrow is crossover Thursday, Locked On Bengals, Locked On Chargers. It's going to be a close one. I don't know who I'm going to pick to win yet, but tomorrow we'll be getting into all of the biggest storylines. To make sure you don't miss it, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. Thank you again to everyone who hit us up at Twitter, at Locked On LAC. We're always going to put question posts out there. You can always hit us up on there. You can also find me on Twitter at Dan Talk Sports and David Drogemeyer at Dro Talk SD. We both post the show to our page every single day. Find us on Instagram at Locked On Chargers and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Shout out to Athea and everyone who called into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. We love getting your guys' voices on the show. If you want to call in to give us your 30-second question or buy or sell, whatever, we love hearing from you guys. But things are starting to heat up. This game is getting real. Make sure you're back here tomorrow for crossover Thursday. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.